a nurse stayed late to comfort a lonely patient, not knowing he was a widowed millionaire who'd rewrite her destiny. Rain tapped steadily against the hospital windows, a soft rhythm that echoed the quiet ache in Claire's chest. The night shift had begun hours ago, but the halls were still and somber, bathed in dim yellow light. The nurse's station buzzed faintly from a flickering monitor, but otherwise, silence ruled the wing. Clare Bennett, 28, moved through the corridors with a calm, practiced grace. Her hair was tied back neatly, her scrubs pressed despite the long hours, and yet, behind her warm smile, there lived a quiet sadness. Life had carved it into her gently. The loss of her parents in a car accident 5 years ago, the betrayal of a fiancé who left her for someone else mere months later. She had learned to survive in solitude. Her heart was full of compassion, but her life was empty of company. She had chosen nursing not only to heal others, but because it gave her purpose when everything else had fallen apart. "Claire," murmured Nurse Gina, passing her in the hall. "You're off duty in 10, right?" Claire nodded. "Yeah, just finishing up with Mr. Walter in 305. Gina frowned. "He's still refusing food?" Claire gave a small, sad smile. "More than just food." Room 305 was dim, the only light coming from the small lamp near the hospital bed. In it lay Walter Whitmore, 83 years old, recovering from pneumonia. He was once a robust man, but now looked small beneath the white sheets. His eyes, sharp and gray, were fixed on the rain sliding down the window pane. His food tray sat untouched on the side table. A paper cup of pills remained sealed. No flowers, no cards, no visitors. Claire stepped inside quietly, checking the IV, adjusting the oxygen flow. "You again?" Walter said, his voice gravelly but rich. She smiled. "You're stuck with me tonight." Walter did not look at her. "Everyone else has someone who visits, sons, daughters, grandkids, friends. Me? I just have memories." Claire paused, then walked over and gently sat beside the bed. "If memories are all you have, Mr. Whitmore," she said softly, "then tonight I'd be honored to share them with you." His eyes finally turned to her, surprised, perhaps even suspicious, but then softened, just slightly. "You should be home," he muttered. Claire looked down at her hands. "Home is just a studio apartment and leftover takeout. I think this is where I'm meant to be tonight." He grunted. "You must be bad at taking care of yourself," she laughed. "Terrible, but I'm great at taking care of others." Walter turned away again, quiet. Claire did not push. She knew how silence could speak louder than any words. She reached for the tray and lifted the spoon. "You have not eaten since morning," she said. "Please, just a little?" He hesitated, then gave a reluctant nod. She fed him slowly, patiently, like he was family. He chewed carefully, swallowing with difficulty, but managed a few bites. "Better," she smiled. "Now, how about those pills? They are much easier with food." He gave her a look, but she could see the faintest trace of trust building. He took the cup, downed the pills, and then leaned back into the pillows, exhaling heavily. Claire pulled the chair closer and rested her elbows on the bed's edge. "Would it be okay if I sat with you for a bit longer?" Walter gave no answer, but he did not ask her to leave. The rain deepened outside, like a lullaby of the sky. Claire rested her hand over his, surprised by how cold and frail it felt. "My mother," she said softly, "used to sing to me when I had trouble sleeping. She had this old lullaby, French, I think, but I never remembered the words, just the sound." She looked at Walter. "Would it be all right if I sang to you, Mr. Whitmore?" He closed his eyes. "You do what you need to, nurse." So she did. Claire began to hum, low, soft, and slow, a melody from her childhood, long buried in memory. The notes wrapped around the room like a warm blanket, smoothing the hard corners of grief and pain. Walter's breathing slowed. Minutes passed. Claire stayed, not because the chart told her to, not because of policy, but because no one should sleep alone with only memories for company. She stayed through her clock-out time, stayed as the rain grew heavier. She helped him drink water once more, adjusted his blanket when he stirred. When he coughed, she held a hand to his back. When he drifted to sleep, he mumbled something barely audible. "Margaret?" Clare did not ask. She just kept her hand on his, humming softly. By morning, when Nurse Gina peeked in, she found Clare still there, her head resting gently on the edge of the bed, stormy-eyed and tender-hearted as ever, and Walter, once cold, resistant, and alone, was sleeping peacefully. Because someone had stayed. Because someone had whispered to the loneliness and soothed it, not with medicine, but with simple human kindness. Clare's apartment was as quiet as the hospital night shifts she had come to know so intimately. A single window framed the city skyline, blurred by morning fog. The furniture was minimal, functional, not decorative. A coffee table stacked with medical journals, a modest bookshelf filled with paperbacks she rarely had time to read, and a framed photo of a woman with warm eyes and auburn hair resting on the mantel. Her mother. The woman who had shaped Clare's soul more than anyone else ever could. Clare had not grown up with much, just her mother and a small house at the edge of town. But what they lacked in money, they made up for in love. Her mother had worked 2 jobs to keep them afloat and never once complained. She made birthdays magical with homemade cakes and sang lullabies in a language Clare never fully learned. Cancer took her mother slowly. Clare was only 19 when she watched the light in those familiar eyes begin to dim, day by painful day. The hospital was sterile, the walls too white, the machines too loud. Doctors came and went, cold and efficient. But one night, when Clare had gone out to the vending machine, a nurse stayed behind. An older woman, with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes. When Clare returned, she saw her mother smiling faintly, her hand held gently by that nurse who was whispering to her like an old friend. Her mother passed away 2 days later, but in Clare's mind, that moment never left. It was not a doctor who brought her mother peace. It was a nurse. That memory lit a fire in her. Clare pivoted from a general biology track to nursing school without hesitation. She wanted to be that calm in the storm for someone else. She did not choose the profession for accolades or salary. She chose it because she understood the power of presence, the dignity of compassion, the sanctity of showing up when no one else would. In the years that followed, she poured herself into her work with unyielding dedication. Her shifts were long, her legs always tired, but she never cut corners. She remembered names, favorite songs, how each patient took their tea or which ones liked their pillows fluffed twice. She volunteered for extra hours, not out of ambition, but because she knew the pain of needing someone and having no one. She was praised often by supervisors, adored by elderly patients, and respected by her peers. But when the scrabs came off and the lights dimmed at home, loneliness settled like dust on her skin. Her love life had unraveled not long after her mother's death. At 24, she had been engaged to Thomas, a pediatric resident she met during her clinical rotations. Handsome, charismatic, and seemingly devoted, he had offered her the illusion of healing, but when she caught him cheating, with a surgical intern no less, she was shattered. He had accused her of being too much in love with the job. Clare never gave him the satisfaction of tears in person, but she cried for weeks afterward, quietly, alone, where no one could witness the unraveling of someone who was always the strong one. Since then, she had chosen solitude. Love felt too fragile, too conditional. But nursing was constant, predictable in its unpredictability, demanding yes, but never deceitful. There were protocols, procedures, outcomes, some tragic, some miraculous, but always rooted in a kind of brutal honesty that Clare found strangely comforting. Each morning she donned her name badge and walked into rooms filled with vulnerability and pain, and she brought with her a gentleness forged by personal loss. She was not just doing her job. She was offering pieces of her heart, quietly, unceremoniously, and often unnoticed. Some nurses grew desensitized. Clare never could. She wept silently after every young death, wrote condolence letters when no one else would, and sat with patients long after their families had stopped coming. Her kindness was never performative. It was instinctual. Because she knew what it meant to be left behind. She saw it in the hollow eyes of elderly patients like Mr. Walter, the ones no one visited, the ones whose charts carried the words, "No known family." She saw it in the quiet panic of cancer patients hearing the word incurable. And she saw it in herself every time she looked in the mirror. Yet despite it all, she chose to stay. Each day she walked into that hospital not with bitterness, but with resolve. Her mother's photo sat inside her locker, taped to the door. It was the last thing she looked at before stepping into a new shift, and the silent promise she made every time was the same: I will be who you needed. I will be who you were. The hospital hallway was quiet, except for the distant hum of machinery and the occasional squeak of rubber soles on linoleum. Andrew Whitmore adjusted the cuff of his tailored shirt as he stepped out of the elevator, his jaw set, eyes unreadable. He had not planned to come. In truth, he had not seen his father in nearly 6 months, not since their last argument over a family trust fund. Or maybe it was something older than that. The fights always blurred together now, like layers of dust on a photograph neither wanted to clean. But when the hospital called to report his father's admission for pneumonia, guilt tugged just hard enough. Andrew had not come out of affection. He came out of duty. Out of a name that still meant something in public, even if it had grown cold behind closed doors. He walked past reception without a word, his footsteps steady. Room 305 was at the end of the hall. Familiar, sterile. He reached the door, his hand hovering near the handle. Then he froze. The light inside was dim, a warm contrast to the clinical brightness of the corridor. Through the small square window of the door, he saw something unexpected. His father, stern, stubborn Walter Whitmore, was lying quietly in bed, his face calm, and beside him sat a woman. She was young, late 20s, maybe early 30s, with auburn hair tucked behind her ears and a soft expression on her face. She was holding his father's hand and singing. Not loud, not performative, a gentle, wordless hum that wove through the room like something sacred. She was not looking for attention, not even aware she had any. Her focus was entirely on the man in the bed, offering presence, not performance. Andrew's chest tightened. His father looked peaceful, more peaceful than Andrew had seen him in years. He stepped back, suddenly uncertain. He did not open the door. He could not. Instead, he stood there, just out of sight, watching from the edge of memory and regret. He should have been the one sitting there. He should have been the one holding his father's hand, speaking softly, easing the old man's pain. But he was not. He had left those moments behind long ago, buried beneath board meetings, stock portfolios, and the quiet anger of a boy who felt abandoned by the man who raised him. Andrew Whitmore, 34, CEO of a global investment firm, had built empires, but he had not built peace with his father. And now, this stranger, this nurse, was doing something he could not remember how to do. She was simply being there. He watched a little longer as she adjusted the blanket over his father's legs, then smoothed the old man's hair with such care it made something ache deep in Andrew's gut. He turned away, slowly walking back down the corridor. His footsteps echoed louder now. At the elevator he hesitated, staring at his own reflection in the polished metal doors. The man who stared back looked put together. Sharp suit, expensive watch, composed exterior. But beneath all that, something stirred. That nurse, he had not even caught her name, had done more in 15 minutes than he had in 15 years. She had made his father feel seen. Back in the car, the rain began to fall. It struck the windshield gently at first, then harder, as if matching the storm that was beginning inside him. He leaned back in the seat, closed his eyes, and for the first time in a long time, did not think about work or deadlines or the next acquisition. He thought about her. The woman who sang to his father like he mattered. The woman who did not know anyone was watching. The woman who, without realizing, had made him feel like a son again. Andrew returned to the hospital the very next day. He told himself it was to check on his father's condition, to speak with the attending physician about progress and medication. That was the reasonable thing to do, logical, expected. But even as he sat stiffly by his father's bedside for a few minutes, asking perfunctory questions, he found himself glancing down the hallway, toward the nurse's station, toward her. She moved with quiet confidence, checking charts, adjusting pillows, always grounded, always grounded. When she passed by the room, she nodded at him politely, the way she would to any visitor. She did not recognize him. Not yet. That anonymity gave Andrew room to simply observe. Over the following days, he began coming more often, sometimes in the morning, sometimes late at night, always alone. He stayed longer, speaking a little more with his father, who still barely talked but seemed somehow calmer than before. And Andrew watched. He noticed how Clare touched people, not just physically but emotionally. She knelt when talking to patients too weak to lift their heads. She remembered names. She brought an old man in room 399 a newspaper every Thursday because he used to work in publishing. She sang, softly, absent-mindedly, while adjusting bed sheets. She made the place feel human. Their first real conversation came near the vending machine, over 2 cups of awful hospital coffee. She offered a small— "You're visiting Mr. Whitmore, right? I've seen you around." Andrew hesitated. "Yes, I am. Is he your friend?" There was a pause. He could have said yes, could have lied, but something in her eyes made honesty feel like the only option. "He's my father," Andrew said quietly. Clare blinked, surprised, but then her gaze softened. "You do not have to explain. Family relationships, they are complicated." He looked down at the black coffee in his hands. "That is putting it lightly." She gave a small laugh, not mocking, just understanding. "He's lucky to have someone coming by," she said. "Is he?" Clare looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "Yes, even silence can be a kind of love, if it comes with presence." They spoke again the next day, and again after that, each conversation brief but increasingly meaningful. She never asked about his job or his money or his suit. Instead, she asked about his father's favorite meal, if he liked music, if he had always been so quiet. Andrew found himself answering her honestly, sometimes even smiling. One evening, as they walked down the hall together after visiting hours, she shared a truth that stayed with him. "You know," she said gently, "medication is not the only thing people need when they are hurting." He glanced at her. "No? No," she replied. "What they need most is to feel they have not been forgotten." Andrew stopped walking. Clare turned to face him. "People don't heal just from pills or procedures. They heal from being seen, from knowing someone still chooses them, even in the hardest moments." He studied her face. She did not say it for effect. She said it because it was her truth. And in that moment, Andrew felt something shift inside him. The bitterness he had worn like armor for years cracked. Just slightly. Because here was a woman who lived with her heart wide open, who did not judge, who gave and gave, even when no one was watching. He did not know her past, he did not know her pain, but he knew this. In a world obsessed with taking, Clare only knew how to give. And somehow, without even trying, she was giving him something too, hope. Clare was adjusting in room 312 when she overheard 2 nurses chatting by the medication cart just outside. "Did you know Mr. Whitmore is Walter Whitmore?" one whispered. Clare paused. "As in Whitmore Technologies," the other said. "The man who built half the hospital wing's funding through his company. His son runs it now, Andrew Whitmore. You know, that quiet guy who's been around lately." Clare's fingers froze on the tubing. Her pulse skipped. Andrew. Her Andrew. She glanced through the open door across the hall where Walter lay sleeping peacefully. The man who rarely smiled, who barely spoke, except now he did. Slowly, tentatively, with a gentleness Clare had coaxed out through whispered songs and shared silences. Andrew had been visiting more often, bringing coffee, asking about her day, watching her, but not in a way that made her shrink, in a way that made her feel seen. And all this time, he was that Andrew Whitmore. Clare finished her task in a blur, her mind racing. When she returned to the nurse's station, she looked him up on her phone, just to be sure. There he was. Andrew Whitmore, 34, CEO of Whitmore Technologies. Fortune 100 executive, quiet billionaire. Formal headshots, interviews, philanthropic features. Suddenly, their vending machine coffees, hallway walks, and late-night conversations felt like something from a different world. That evening, when her shift ended, She walked out under a sky scattered with stars, her thoughts still tangled, only to find Andrew leaning against his car by the curb, hands tucked in his coat pockets. "I was hoping to catch you," he said. Clare stopped. "I found out who you are." He gave a small, sheepish smile. "I figured you might." "You could have said something." "I could have," he admitted, "but I did not want you to treat me any differently." Clare crossed her arms, uncertain. "And why were you really coming back? All those visits?" Andrew stepped closer, his voice lower, more sincere. "At first, I just wanted to know who had changed my father." Clare blinked. "He was fading," Andrew said. "Not just from illness, but from life. Then one day I saw him smiling. Not much, but real. Like he remembered how to be human again. I stood outside that room, watching you sing to him, and I realized I had never done that, not once." Clare softened, but didn't speak. He went on, quieter now. "I wanted to know who you were, what kind of person gave my father something I had forgotten how to give." Clare's voice was gentle. "He is still your father, Andrew. He was always difficult," he said, looking down. "Even when I was a kid, he was distant, cold. Success mattered more than stories at bedtime. When my mother died, he shut down. And I think I did too, in my own way. I left home, built a company, made money, but the space between us just grew." He looked up again, his eyes meeting hers. "And then you, without even trying, closed that distance. Not with grand gestures, just by being you." Clare felt the ache of understanding between them. "You still could have told me who you were." "I was afraid it would change things," he said. "But I want to be honest now. That's why I'm here. And to ask if you'd let me take you to dinner." Clare hesitated, her instincts telling her to retreat. This world, this life, it was too different. But his voice was steady, his eyes open. "It's just dinner," he said softly. "No expectations, just a chance to talk. Outside these walls." She nodded slowly. "Okay, dinner." They went to a small bistro tucked into a quiet corner of the city, nowhere flashy, intimate enough that they could talk without being seen. They sat by a window, candlelight flickering between them, soft jazz playing in the background. Over plates of roasted chicken and glasses of wine, Andrew opened up more than she had expected. He spoke of boarding schools, a mother who read poetry aloud while Walter worked late, and the silence that replaced laughter after her funeral. He told Clare about how he had buried his grief in numbers, achievements, the rush of building an empire that never quite filled the void. And then he looked at her. "You know," he said, voice low, "people like me, we're trained to calculate risk, predict outcomes. But nothing about you fits any equation I've ever understood." Clare tilted her head gently. "You move through pain like someone who has known it intimately, but you do not let it harden you. You show up, day after day, and offer kindness with no price tag. You reminded my father what it means to feel safe again, and me." He paused, exhaled, and then added softly, "You reminded me what it means to feel anything." Clare's heart clenched. He reached across the table and lightly touched her hand. "You do not know what you've done to me, Clare Bennett, but you've made me believe, maybe, just maybe, it's not too late to start again." Candlelight danced between them. Outside, rain tapped softly on the window, but neither of them noticed. Inside, something tender was blooming. Something both fragile and extraordinary. The hospital wing was quiet that night, wrapped in the soft stillness that only came after midnight. Most of the lights had been dimmed, and the only sound came from the faint beeping of monitors and the rhythmic click of a nurse's shoes down the corridor. Andrew had not planned to stop by so late. His meetings had run long, the rain had started again, and something about the night pulled at him, an invisible thread guiding him back to room 305. When he arrived, he found the door slightly ajar. He raised his hand to knock but paused at the sound of a voice. Clare's. Soft, gentle, and unguarded. He stepped closer, remaining just outside the door, hidden in the shadow of the hallway. Inside, Claire sat by Walter's bedside, her hand resting over the older man. "I don't mean to speak out of place," she said quietly, "but I've seen the way your eyes change when he walks into the room." Walter was awake, lying still, his expression unreadable. Claire continued, her tone calm and thoughtful. "Your son, I think all he ever wanted was to make you proud, to hear you say that he was enough, not for his money or achievements, but just for being your son." Walter blinked, his lips pressed tight. Claire gave him a small, bittersweet smile. "We all carry wounds, Mr. Whitmore. Some are visible, some we tuck away behind success or silence, but they do not go away. I think Andrews have just been waiting for someone to notice." Walter turned his head slightly, his breath uneven, his hand tightened around Claire's. "I never told him," he said hoarsely. Claire said nothing. She simply listened. "I watched him grow up, brilliant, driven, so much like his mother," Walter whispered. "But after she passed, I didn't know how to love him right. I thought keeping him strong meant keeping my distance. I never said the words, never told him that he mattered more than the company, more than anything." His voice cracked. "I thought he knew." Claire's eyes glistened. "Sometimes we need to hear it." Walter blinked back tears. "I was wrong." There was a long silence. "If you can see that much in him," Walter said, his voice trembling, "then maybe I haven't lost him entirely." Claire leaned forward, gently squeezing his hand. "It's never too late to say the words." Outside the door, Andrew stood frozen. His throat tightened, his vision blurred. He had not cried in years. Not at the funeral, not during the worst of the fights, not when he walked away and promised himself he would never look back. But now, as he listened to Claire speak of wounds he had never shared aloud, as he heard his father break through a lifetime of silence, he felt something crack open. Tears welled in his eyes and slid down his cheeks, silent and unstoppable, because for the first time in his life he felt seen, understood, loved even, if not by his father, then by the woman who had somehow touched both of them. Claire's voice again, softer now. "I think he's still waiting, Mr. Whitmore. Just one word from you. It would mean everything." Inside, Walter nodded slowly, eyes full of regret. Outside, Andrew wiped his face with the sleeve of his coat, breath unsteady, heart wide open. And in the hush of that hospital corridor, a son found the words he had needed his whole life, not in the voice of his father, but in the quiet grace of the woman who saw them both. The chapel was small and quiet, just as Walter Whitmore had requested in his final days. No grand ceremony, no speeches, only a scattering of white lilies, a few chairs filled by long-retired business partners and hospital staff, and the soft hum of a hymn playing through old speakers. Claire stood in the back, dressed in simple black, hands clasped tightly in front of her. She had been there at the end, when Walter's breathing grew shallow and his eyes no longer focused. She had held his hand, whispered soft things, and hummed the lullaby he once pretended not to care about. She had been the one to close his eyes when the monitor went still. He had died in peace. And she had stayed until the room was dark and quiet. Now, as the casket was lowered, Claire blinked back tears that had long dried up in the past few days. She did not cry the way others did. Her grief was quiet, folded neatly in the corners of her heart. She mourned not only the man, but the journey, the quiet redemption between a father and son, the moments of honesty he had finally allowed himself. After the service, while others exchanged polite condolences and filtered away, Claire remained. She stood beneath the large oak tree near the edge of the cemetery, the cold wind catching strands of her hair. She had already made her decision. She would transfer hospitals. She had submitted the request that morning. It felt like the right thing to do. Boundaries mattered. She had crossed them, emotionally, professionally, and now that Walter was gone, her presence might only complicate things, especially for Andrew. She was reaching for closure, until she heard footsteps behind her. She turned to find him there. Andrew, hands in his coat pockets, eyes red-rimmed but steady. He stood in front of her, silent for a moment. Then, with a voice that trembled ever so slightly, he asked, "Is it true? You're leaving?" Claire nodded. "I filed the request this morning. Why?" She looked away, her voice quiet. "Because I stayed too long, felt too much. I blurred the lines. I was there at the end, Andrew, and I do not know where the nurse ends and the woman begins anymore." He stepped closer, eyes never leaving hers. "If you go," he said, "you will take with you the only part of my father that ever made sense to me." Claire frowned, her breath catching. "You'll take the warmth?" Andrew said. "The music, the patience, the truth he was too scared to say but showed every time he looked at you." Her voice broke. "Andrew?" He reached out, his hand brushing hers. "He left me money, property, a company, but you're the only thing he gave me that I never expected." Claire shook her head. "I'm scared. Of what?" She looked up at him, eyes shining. "Not of loving the wrong person anymore. That used to be my fear." He waited. "I'm scared of losing the right one," she whispered. His hand closed gently around hers. "You're not losing anything," he said. "You're finding it." The wind rustled the leaves above them. Claire stepped into him, her forehead against his chest, tears falling quietly now, and Andrew, who had spent most of his life building walls, wrapped his arms around her and let them fall. 1 year later, the world felt softer. The grief had not vanished, but it had been reshaped, folded gently into something meaningful. Where silence once settled in the corners of hospital rooms and heavy hearts, now there was warmth, light, and laughter. Claire stood beneath a white awning draped in ivy and lace, looking out at the small crowd gathered in the sun-drenched courtyard of the newly inaugurated Walter Foundation. Staff, volunteers, donors, and, most importantly, residents from long-term care homes across the city filled the space with quiet joy. Elderly hands clutched paper cups of lemonade, wrinkled faces beamed as they listened to live music drifting from the garden. She saw them, the ones society had forgotten, and today they were being celebrated. This was the dream she and Andrew had built from Walter's legacy, an organization dedicated to dignified end-of-life care, focused on the emotional, human moments that mattered most. Music, companionship, memory walks, personalized care, things no chart could measure, but every soul deserved. Claire had never been prouder of anything. Andrew stood beside her, speaking with one of the donors, his shirt sleeves rolled up, his expression animated in a way she had never seen in those first cold days. There was something in his posture now that no longer carried weight, but purpose, joy. She caught his eye. He smiled at her, quick, crooked, and real. Later, as the event wound down and the last guests sipped tea beneath the magnolia trees, Andrew walked up behind her and touched her elbow. "Come with me," he said gently. She followed him through the cobblestone path winding behind the main building, past rose bushes and benches, until they reached a small, hidden garden shaded by olive trees. It had been Walter's favorite spot when he was well enough to sit outside. A simple place, one stone bench, one winding vine, and silence that always felt peaceful. The bench looked freshly cleaned. Claire tilted her head. "I haven't been back here in months." "I know," Andrew said. He gestured for her to sit. When she did, he reached under the bench and pulled out a small wooden box, worn and smooth with age. He held it for a moment, then placed it in her lap. Claire glanced at him, then slowly opened the lid. Inside was a velvet ring box and a folded, yellowed sheet of paper. Her breath caught. She unfolded the note carefully. The handwriting was shaky, but unmistakably Walter's. "If my son loves this girl, then it means he has learned how to be a man again. It means he has learned how to be kind, to forgive, to feel. I could not teach him those things the way she did, but if he found her and he chooses her, then I know I did not fail entirely. Give her this ring, not as a promise from me, but as a blessing." Claire's eyes filled, her fingers trembling slightly as she folded the letter back. When she looked up, Andrew was kneeling before her. He opened the velvet box. Inside was a ring, simple, elegant, with a single stone that shimmered like moonlight. "I do not know where life is supposed to begin again," he said softly, his voice trembling. I do not know the right steps or the perfect timing." He swallowed. "But I know this. If I can begin again with you, then I am willing to learn everything all over." Clare blinked, her heart in her throat. He continued, his eyes never leaving hers. "You taught me how to feel, how to listen, how to live. You loved my father when I could not. You loved me when I was still learning how." Tears slipped down Clare's cheeks. "Will you marry me, Clare Bennett?" he asked. For a moment, the wind paused. The garden held its breath. Then she nodded, tears falling freely now. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." He stood and she wrapped her arms around him, pressing her face into his shoulder, laughter and tears blending like sunlight after rain. Behind them, a few elderly guests had wandered into the garden. They clapped softly, some wiping their eyes, others smiling knowingly. Because they, more than anyone, understood what it meant to find love when you thought all the chances were gone. Stormy, now older but still proud, trotted into the scene with a wagging tail, circling their legs like a silent witness to the entire story. And in that quiet corner of the world, beneath the trees and beside the ghosts of memory, a new chapter began. Where grief had once grown, love had taken root, and in the garden where Walter had once sat alone, his son and the woman who healed them both stood hand in hand, together, and never lonely again. Sometimes, healing does not come through grand gestures, but through quiet presence. A song in the dark, a hand held without being asked, a heart that dares to stay. Clare and Andrew's story is a reminder that even after loss, even after silence, love can find its way back. If we're brave enough to listen, to forgive, and to begin again. If this story touched your heart, we invite you to be part of our growing community. Please like, share, and subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories, where every tale is crafted to heal, to inspire, and to remind us that it's never too late for love, hope, or second chances. We'll see you in the next story.